Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another ASMR video where today we're going to be keeping with the trend of the 2022 Senate elections. This time we're going to be going over something a little bit different but a little bit similar. Still, we're going to be talking about, like I said, the Senate and the elections that will be held in 2022. But this time I want to kind of break down some polling surrounding it. Now, of course, this is very, very, very early into the election season. Primaries haven't happened yet in the state for any candidate. We only have some clear front runners, or not front runners rather, but we have some clear ideas of who will be running for this election in certain battleground states. So if we swap back over very quickly to our electoral map, as usual, we can fill in a lot of these states that, don't need to be talked about. States such as California and Oregon and Washington. States such as Colorado and Hawaii and Illinois and Maryland, New York, Connecticut, and Vermont. These states aren't competitive. There is no reality that I see that any of these states will be competitive in any sort of way. The one that could be closest to competitive is Colorado, although you would need a super, very, very strong Republican candidate to run in Colorado, and that is very, very unlikely, especially since how the state has shifted to the left. Now, when we talk about Republican states, states such as Utah, Idaho, North and South Dakota, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Alabama, South Carolina, Kentucky, and Indiana, and Alaska are states that are very, very safe. These states aren't competitive for the GOP or for the Democrats to fight in. There is everything else is either likely or lean for either party. So, going back to our polling, as you can see, the states that are competitive, Nevada, Arizona, Montana, Iowa, Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. So moving over to back to our polling. This polling is courtesy of 538. We're going to be going pretty far down the list. Now, I'm using 538 because they are one of the most accessible polling aggregates. Now, again, a disclaimer, these polls are extremely, extremely early. Normally, you shouldn't even look at polls until, literally a year later. However, just for content, just to get an early idea of where some of these polls are at, we're going to be looking at these current polls that we have back from April 2nd all the way back to, we might go back into February. There's a lot of polls to look at, so we'll see how it is. So I'm going to be assessing these polls, what they could mean for either candidate. I'm going to be using mostly last names. As to be entirely honest with you, I'm not 100% sure who each of these people are, and I won't care to until primary season starts and everything. Some of these candidates are not officially running, and instead these are polls that are for candidates who may or may not run. So, for example, I think Chris Sununu has a few polls on this list in New Hampshire. He has not announced a Senate bid for 2022, although it is likely that he does. So, moving on, first one we have was just about 9 days ago. A Change Research poll with quite a heavy sample. 1,723 likely voters is a pretty big number for a poll. Generally you only see these kinds of numbers around like either like very large budget um, polls for the Senate or for approval ratings of a president. So this is a pretty big sample, which always helps in deducing how good the poll may be. 538 puts Change Research at a B minus, which is above average, or slightly, I believe, above average for a poller. 538 has recently changed its polling ranking methodology to basically entirely encapsulate how accurate the poller has been in the past. So, polls like Rasmussen and Trafalgar, which may be unreliable polls because they're biased towards Republicans, have gotten much better ratings because, despite them being favorable to Republicans, the polls favored Democrats in 2016-2020. So, of course, a poll that would guess right by going some other direction would be more accurate. Now, whether this is luck or not will be left up to time, and we'll see in 2022 as more polls come out. But anyway, this poll was conducted between March 25th, March 27th. I'm not going to be opening any of these polls up and looking through them. That would be tedious. It would take a long time. But the basic result is that Nelson, I think his name is Bill Nelson, it leads Ron Johnson, the incumbent Republican there, by 4%. Now, a very common theme around this is that almost none of these candidates are at 50%. 50% is a really strong benchmark because 50% will always win you an election, whether it be runoff or normally. So, as you can see, Nelson has a 48% to Johnson's 44%. Now, neither candidate has 50%, but if this poll is to be trusted, which it looks pretty good from the surface level, that Nelson leads Johnson, and this poll makes perfect sense. Wisconsin voted for Joe Biden in 2020 by a very narrow margin, 0.6%. And as Democrats are seen relatively favorably across the nation, this makes perfect sense that that Democrat popularity paired with Ron Johnson's unpopularity would spell about a plus 4% nod for somebody who may run. I'm not sure if Bill Nelson, if that is his name, I'm not sure if Nelson is confirmed to be running, though it could be likely. There's also been some drama going around in Wisconsin gauging that Donald Trump might force Ron Johnson to run or something similar. That we'll have to see. Trump is still busy endorsing 2022 candidates and primarying non-loyal voters or non-loyal politicians. So we'll have to wait and see. But as it goes, this is a pretty expected poll. On top of another expected poll in the U.S. Senate. This one's interesting. I'm not sure why this was added March 26th, because this poll was taken right before Election Day, October 23rd to November 2nd. It's an optimist poll of a B or C rating with 802 likely voters, with Harrison at 41% and Graham at 51%, with a Graham plus 10. I think this is pretty close to where the election ended up. This would make 8% undecided, with Graham already at 10%. I think if we go and here, let's look up the South Carolina 2020 results. If we look this up here, this was about perfect. This was a perfect poll. Again, I'm not really sure why this was included, especially 4 months later after the election. But yeah, both candidates this was basically spot on, and each candidate just gained 3%, and the rest were write-ins. So yeah, that's pretty accurate. Led by plus 10.2% lead for Lindsey Graham against Jamie Harrison. But anyway, back to talking about relevant polling because, of course, in 2022, I forget who is running for the South Carolina Senate. I think Joe Cunningham could be a Democrat running. I forget who the Republican is, but he is basically expected to win the seat. Now, we have a lot of polls here by Public Policy Polling, a fairly strong, a very strong pollster, A- rating, that's almost the best. And we have 6 polls here, centering around Ohio. And Ohio is a very, very interesting state because it's one that the Democrats probably don't have a big chance in. But the Senate retiree there could make things interesting, in particular with Tim Ryan. So all these polls are of 700 voters, so these are definitely voters. Now again, very early to tell, but in the first poll, or the first 3 polls, we see Tim Ryan being pitted against different Republican candidates, Vance, Timken, and Mandel. So each one, Ryan is about at 38% support. Now, this makes sense. 38% is probably the number of hardline Democrats in Ohio. Probably a bit more, maybe about maybe 43% are hardline Democrats in Ohio. Or maybe even a little more, maybe 45%. I'm not sure. Again, we're spitballing. So this is somewhere lower than the number of hardline Democrats who would always vote Democrat. So Tim Ryan is about at 30% flat against Vance. Vance is at 40, Timken's at 41, and Mandel's at 42. So what we can see from this is Tim Ryan, who is 100% without a doubt the strongest Republican to run for the Ohio Senate in 2022, is a bit down in polls surrounding this. Now, if you ask a lot of people, Tim Ryan's probably the best bet of taking that Senate seat. But it seems that from these early polls, which have been accurate in the past, he is not doing very favorably well. I'm not sure if he has announced a bid for Senate. If he hasn't, that could be a reason why, but we'll have to wait and see. So as now, you see Republicans just kind of have a natural advantage in Ohio, and that's 100% true, as you've seen with Trump, especially Trump-backed populist candidates. So, moving to the next set of polling, this is Acton versus Vance, Timken, and Mandel. I'm not sure who Acton is. Unfortunately, I'll have to do more research. I just kind of wanted to record this video and give a very amateur take. But Acton, whoever this person is, seems to be doing better than Tim Ryan in these polls by plus 2%, even, and plus 1%. So he is higher at 40 to 42%. Now you have to ask yourself, why does Acton have a higher on average percentage than Tim Ryan? No, maybe because he is more well known, or actually, you know what? Just to get a bit of insight, let's look up who Acton is. No, not Acton. I'm sorry. Amy Acton. Okay. She's the former director of the Ohio Department of Health. Physician. Okay, so she is a leading role in the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. That's actually interesting. And the reason that that's interesting is because Ohio, being a more Republican state, has, Republicans are generally less amicable towards COVID restrictions. So, and given that Amy Acton is a Democrat, it is probably likely she tried to impose restrictions that Republicans are just not a huge fan of. However, if she's, polling better than these other candidates right now, that could be a sign that maybe she has, done something well. Again, I came into this a little unprepared, so you might just hear me ramble, make guesses, educated guesses of what I could think of, because, right now I'm not 100% known on these candidates. Maybe when the primary season comes off, or starts up again, we can look, because there's probably dozens of candidates for the Senate in each state. So between Amy Acton and Tim Ryan, we'll have to see how it goes. But generally, you want a pro-labor Democrat to run in Ohio, because similar to Sherrod Brown, who is very pro-labor, he was able to win his Senate seat. You would need someone like that. So I think Tim Ryan is still the strongest, although I'm not too much sure about Amy Acton. However, these polls, which are pretty reliable, are showing her up. Now, the end-all be-all is that both of these polls, neither of the candidates really hit 43%. So there's still tons and tons and tons of undecided voters, and that's pretty much how it will be, which is interesting because Ohio has way more undecided voters, which likely will swing to the Republican Party more than this Senate poll in Wisconsin, which only has 8% undecided. So we'll have to wait and see. Moving down the list a little bit more, we have from March 12th, we have some Georgia Senate polls. Now, these are Trafalgar Group polls, so we'll have to see, you have to take a little bit of caution with Trafalgar, because the Trafalgar, are not the best reliable pollsters. I'm more on the side of them being just biased towards Republicans. They won't talk about their methodology or anything of the sort. So you have to take a little bit of a grain of salt when looking at these. But these poll of about 1,100 likely voters, I think can serve as a way to gauge how well Warnock is doing, because Warnock, I think, is a little bit of a more of a weak candidate in the terms of the American voting base, because he is, he's pretty anti-police, he's anti-Israel, very progressive, we'll say that, at least in his ideals. So looking at this, and Warnock's not hitting. Warnock, who I think earlier had like a higher favorability than not in Georgia, not even scratching 47% in these polls. That's not very good. Against Loeffler, though, he has plus 5%, and we know how the runoff went down. Warnock won 51-49 in that Senate seat against Loeffler, so it's clear that the Georgian people just don't like Kelly Loeffler. So this poll, I don't think, means that much. This one, now these two could be particularly for 2024, the 2022 Senate race, where Warnock has to defend his seat to get a full term. Now Warnock versus Walker, this is very interesting because these numbers are very close. 46-48 with Walker plus 2. Now, this kind of, I think, casts a little doubt that even now, if this poll is to be completely trusted, this casts a little bit of doubt onto Warnock's ability to win in Georgia, because he is someone who was just elected, hasn't really done anything controversial aside from some of his previous scandals, but he was elected anyway. So if a Republican candidate's already polling higher, that could spell doom, especially since Republicans have the natural upper hand in the 2022 Senate. And again, another poll shows Warnock up against Collins, just someone that is less popular. So if these polls are to be trusted, which I would be a little bit careful with them, it is possible that this could spell a little bit of trouble for Warnock. Now, getting down into these polls, this is a batch of New Hampshire polls, the first of which is by St. Anselm College with 871 registered voters. Now, this one is in New Hampshire, from March 4th to 6th, 2020, is about a month ago, with Maggie Hassan versus Chris Sununu. Now, if you don't know who Chris Sununu is the governor of New Hampshire. He's a bit of a more liberal Republican, but he's very, very well liked. And when it comes down to this, Maggie Hassan's, relatively, just overall, like, well, relatively liked. She won her Senate seat, I think, relatively narrowly in 2016, but Chris Sununu running could basically secure the seat down for Republicans because he's so popular. So this early poll by a pollster who was relatively reliable, AB rating, with Chris Sununu +6, that is a likely margin. That is really bad for the Democrats if you look at it that way. Maggie Hassan, 41%. That a lot of people, 47% of voters already, if this poll is to be trusted, already want Sununu. So, looking at this could be very bad for the Democrats and just what the Republicans want. Chris Sununu to run and win by this large margin. Now, of course, no one's at 50%, but Chris Sununu is close to that number, and because of that, this is definitely a state to watch out to see if Chris Sununu runs, because if he does, the polling is going to be very, very interesting, and probably likely in the Republican hands. We have some other polls. This one's from February, from the University of New Hampshire, with about 1.6 thousand likely voters. February 18th to 22nd. We're going a little bit farther back now. Now, we have Maggie Hassan, of course, the incumbent. She's going to be running again against Len Winowski, Bolduc, Ayo, and Chris Sununu. Now, Maggie Hassan is already breaking 50% against Len Winowski and Bolduc. These are huge margins, 19 plus 13. These are big. Kelly, I think her name is Kelly Ayo. She is, I forget what office she holds, but she's a more popular Republican, holding 5%. Now, if you look at these polls, you can see that she drops 4 or 5% down to 48%. This means that people who would normally vote Hassan against Len Winowski and Bolduc are not going to say that against Ayo, so they could like Ayo a lot more. They're now swing voters because Ayo would be running instead of Bolduc. So either one of these two candidates running would probably result in a Hassan victory by a large margin. But with Kelly Ayo, and Chris Sununu, these are different. Hassan is much less popular against these more powerful Republicans that live in New Hampshire. And again, another poll with Hassan at 46% and Chris Sununu up to at 48%. So we'll have to see how these things go. And for our last two polls, in the U.S. Senate, this one is not important. We're gonna do it. U.S. Senate in Vermont by Braun Research, September 3rd to 13th, 15th, 2020. This is odd. I don't know why this poll would be conducted so far back and why it would be added now. Because this is a poll conducted way later. Now, I think Patrick Leahy is he's the pro tempore of the Senate. He's, I think, one of the oldest members in the Senate. Very, very old. He might retire. This poll shows Scott up by plus 40% to Leahy's 38%. This poll isn't important. There is absolutely no way that Vermont will ever be anything less than a Democratic safe state, even if Leahy retires. I don't even think that Republicans can get 40% in Vermont. Vermont's an extremely Democratic state. But I guess maybe if you want some sort of commentary, this can kind of show that, Leahy, a lot of voters are tired of Leahy. They're not a big fan of him. But we'll have to see. And the final one is between Kander and Roy Blunt. This is an outdated poll because Roy Blunt has retired. As we know, he's going to be retiring in 2022. But this is an important poll because of Democratic support. So Roy Blunt, I think if Roy Blunt were to run in 2022, I believe it pretty likely that he wouldn't win a Senate seat. Back in 2016, Roy Blunt only won that seat by what I believe is 2.5%. So if like Cantor's already at 44% as a base against Roy Blunt, who is in a basically Republican safe state, only being up by 1%, that's really bad. But now, of course, things are different because Roy Blunt's retiring. He won't be running in 2022, so we'll have to see we'll have to see some more polls later on to see if this state is competitive. I believe it'll be competitive. So looking at these, the takeaways. Swapping back over. So looking at the takeaways, there's no polling for Nevada, there's no polling for Arizona, none for Iowa, there is some polling for Montana, there is polling for Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, or not Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, and Georgia. So, going off these characterizations, this would be a lean state for Montana, or not Montana, Missouri. A lean state for Democrats. They're already ahead here. A draw sub state for New York, or for New Hampshire, sorry. And like a very, like a tilt Republican state for Ohio. And also like a tilt Republican state for Georgia. So looking at this, Republicans are already up. So let's say they take, let's say Chris Sununu runs, he takes New Hampshire. Then, Republicans are in a pretty strong spot to have already 47 seats. Now, at this point, Republicans need to just retain Iowa, which they probably will, retain Florida, and retain North Carolina, and that's it. And Democrats pick up Pennsylvania, they pick up Nevada. I mean, they keep Nevada, they keep Arizona. It's just back to a split. Now, of course, they could flip Wisconsin as well. Sorry about that. They could flip Wisconsin as well, and boom, they got back to the Senate majority. Or Democrats can go more on the offensive. Can have Tim Ryan win in Ohio. Warnock stay in Georgia. Chris Sununu doesn't run, so Maggie Hassan wins in here. They run someone in Missouri. Who knows? Really, who knows? But as it's going right now, you can tell that polls are slightly favoring Democrats because the environment favors Democrats. But as things change within the system, and Democrats likely will get less popular, and as Democrats get less popular due to how that's just how incumbent parties generally work, because Biden probably won't be like a spectacular president by any means. So as things change, we'll probably see polling change. We'll have to see who runs in Wisconsin. We'll see if Ron Johnson runs, Chris Sununu runs. We'll have to see if Tim Ryan's the front runner. Bunch of different things. But as it stands, that's how the polling data is looking right now for the very, very, very early 2022 Senate race. So hopefully you all enjoyed this video. Enjoyed me talking about all this. Thank you so much for watching. If indeed you still are watching, or not asleep, or doing something else, or whatever. Thank you all so much for watching. Sleep well, stay safe, and of course,